Is the Bible literal? Well, we're going to get into it. First, thanks for watching the video, for the channel, for liking, subscribing, all that good stuff. You know, Timothy tells us to be diligent, to be approved, to be a workman. So we're going to be a workman. Let's get into it. This video is going to cover the 2 laws that I have, the 8 principles, rules. There's going to be a good video, great video by BioLogos. And then why is this important? So some of these things, this is what we're going to cover in it. There's really 2 laws that I love to go by. There's 8 rules for sound biblical hermeneutics. First one for me is paramount is free will engineering design. Look, before everything was created, God wanted to hang out and be friends. He gave us a choice to do that. Number 2, go by this. The Bible is 100% literal. Every single interpretative part of it is just unpacking the literal. So for us to understand, that's what I like to go by. That's my 1-2 rules. Now here's a great video by BioLogos on the term literal. It's probably one of the better ones. I really do love how he goes into it. So here you go.
Hi, I'm Dr. Peter Enns. I'm Senior Fellow in Biblical Studies at the BioLogos Foundation. And we're here today with the Reverend Dr. Tom Wright. And we have a chance to ask some questions, some of which we've gotten via Twitter and emails, and also about a lot of topics such as his recent book, After You Believe, and science and faith issues. So welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
Good to see you again. Now into sort of science and faith discussion specifically, and there are many questions about this. But one question is, if you take Genesis in a non-literal fashion, especially the creation stories, why take anything in the Bible literally, like, say, the Gospels? Do you take the Gospels literally?
I want to say that the word literal is confusing. The word literal, like the word metaphorical, is actually a word which refers to the way that words refer to things. Whereas what we often mean is the distinction between concrete and abstract. Concrete being something definite, physical, substantial, abstract being like an idea. Now you can refer metaphorically to something concrete. If I call my car the old tin can, that's a metaphorical reference to something that is definitely solid. Or you can refer literally to something abstract. If I say Plato's theory of forms, that theory is itself an abstraction, and the forms are themselves abstract, and it's doubly abstract, but I'm referring literally to it. So when we say, is Genesis to be taken literally, what I want to say is that doesn't settle ahead of time the question of what it actually refers to. And when we are reading any text, it ought to be an open question. What does this text intend to refer to, and how does it intend to refer to it? And famously, when you read in the Gospels, Jesus saying there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger one took the cash and ran and then came back, etc., etc. It makes no sense for a reader of the Gospels to say, I need to know where this farm was. I want to know what the name of that father was. Can I go and visit him? Or could you have done at the time? That's just, Jesus himself and his first hearers would have said, don't be silly. That's a parable. So I want to say that you've got to go case by case. When it says Jesus was crucified, it really means Jesus was crucified. That isn't a subtle metaphor for something else. But when Jesus himself tells a parable, the point is not that this actually happened somewhere and we're drawing lessons from it. The point is this is a cheerfully fictitious story, but often the real meaning remains concrete. If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they believe even if one should rise from the dead. And the concrete application of that is, if you've got a poor man covered in sores by your gate, you ought to be looking after him. So it's a much more interesting and complicated question than your culture and mine has ever allowed us to get into by this literal, non-literal split. So when you go back to Genesis with all of that, I really want to know, what did the writer of Genesis, or the people who wrote the bits and pieces which came together as Genesis, what did they intend to do by this story? And as we know from various people, telling a story about somebody who constructs something in 6 days, it's a temple story. It's about God making a place for himself to dwell, and this is heaven and earth. And what you do with that is, the last thing is you put an image of the God into this temple. And suddenly, Genesis 1, instead of it being were there 6 days or were there 5 or were there 7 or were there 24 hours, it's actually about God making heavens and the earth as the place where he wants to dwell, and putting humans into that construct as a way of both reflecting his own love into the world and drawing out the praise and glory from the world back to himself. And that's the literal meaning of Genesis. And the question of the formal structure has to sit around that as best it can.
Yeah, and that's how I would definitely go a step further and say, case by case, it unpacks the concrete so that our minds can understand it. That's how I would. The summary is great, concrete versus abstract. And once again, every interpretive analysis only helps the student unpack what is actually literal. Okay, so let's get into the 8 principal rules and guidelines for most Western seminary. Number 1, the rule of definition. So for the rule of that definition is how we want to be able to start out with how we're going to interpret. Second one would be the rule for usage. Primarily Old Testament is for the Jews, it's in Hebrew, and then now New Testament is mainly Greek with Hebrew, Aramaic. The third rule is going to be the rule of context. One of the things that I love was by a pastor who said a text without context will lead to a pretext, which is error. And that's just a beautiful way to say that. If you don't take it in its full context, it'll lead to error. The rule of historical background. And we want to incorporate all the different historical writings around that to help us interpret it. And that's a wise way to do that. The rule of logic. Hey, it's pretty, I like to say here is, if it's common sense is logical, and we should be able to take in all the logic around that interpretation. And then the 6th one is the rule of precedent. This one's a great one because if it has a precedent within the Bible, then yes, now we can trust that precedent that's been there. Number 7, the rule of unity. Hey, all the way through the Bible, we should be able to have a unity into what we're trying to interpret within that one particular verse or chapter. The number 8 is the rule of inference. Now, inference is like, or a fact, and logical sequence has another fact that can be proven. So we're going to take all 8 of those rules or principles, as well as I like to start out always with the number 1 and 2, and now we're getting to that concrete part. So why bother? Why would we spend so much time trying to do this before reading, before understanding? Of course we want to be approved, but we want to be workmen's. We want to be able to accurately handle the Word of God. And what I like to say is there's really 2 kingdoms at war. And what if you've seen some of my other videos, one of them specifically is about the 2 kingdoms. When we speak, our words have power. So we have the ability to think, we have the ability to reason, and then we have the ability now to speak it out, where now it's going to take action. When we do those things, that word or words now has life. It has meaning, but it also allows for one of 2 things to happen. Either God's going to be able to now bless those words because we have taken the time to understand it, apply it, and use it. Or the kingdom of Satan, his kingdom, is now going to be able to now afflict, to bring curses upon that word, that one word. And so our lack of knowledge or our lack of understanding is really going to generate one of 2 things. This is why it's important to, I believe, to not only use those 2 first laws, but also, of course, the 8 rules, principles that sound hermeneutics will follow. If you do these things, I think you get conditioned into how you're going to go about studying the Bible. And when you take those really 10 things all together, you're going to be a wise student, you're going to be a sharp student, and then also you'll be more of a blessing, you'll have more light that comes through you, and instead of errors, instead of affliction to yourself and into others. I hope that this video blessed you. Thanks again for liking, subscribing. Shalom, shalom. May His perfect peace be upon you.